As Jesus reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. Hi, I'm Gary, and you're watching 7 Minutes in the Word. If the first chapter of Mark is about Jesus' teaching and healing and growing popularity with the people, then the second chapter is about his increasing conflict with the scribes and the Pharisees. In last week's lesson, the Pharisees were unhappy with Jesus because he told a paralytic that his sins were forgiven. They did not recognize him as being divine, as being God, and since only God can forgive sins, they figured that he had committed blasphemy. In today's lesson, the scribes of the Pharisees question Jesus' morals when they observe him eating with sinners. But first, Jesus calls another disciple to follow him. In Mark, the second chapter, verses 13 and 14, he went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. Now, setting the scene, Jesus is in Capernaum, which is on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Lake of Tiberias. Now, this is the same town where Jesus called his first disciples, Andrew, Peter, James, and John. And they were fishermen. Now, in verses 13 and 14, we read that Jesus was walking once again down by the seashore where he saw Levi, also called Matthew, sitting at a tax booth because he was a tax collector. And most likely he had his booth down by the seashore because he was probably collecting taxes from the fishermen based upon their catch of the day. And so he was most likely the tax collector who dealt with Andrew, Peter, James, and John, which means they hated him. He was their hated tax collector. But if we read in Luke, the 5th chapter, in verse 28, Luke tells us that Levi, he left everything, just like Andrew, Peter, James, and John did. Well, he left everything to follow Jesus. Unlike the fishermen who could return to fishing, Levi couldn't return to being a tax collector after once abandoning a Roman tax booth. Continuing now in Mark, the 2nd chapter, verses 15 through 17. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." Whether this is the house that Jesus was staying in, or if it was Levi's house, we don't know. The scripture is unclear on that. But what Luke does tell us is that Matthew, or Levi, threw a large feast in honor of Jesus. And many of Levi's friends, being tax collectors and sinners, attended the feast. Now, sinners is a general term. Basically, it included anyone that the Pharisees didn't approve of, anyone that they did not think were following their understanding of the law. And increasingly, Jesus and his disciples are being included in that group by the Pharisees. When Jesus' disciples were asked why he was eating with such an immoral gathering, Jesus didn't give his disciples an opportunity to answer. They too may not have known. They too may have been at a loss for an answer. So Jesus immediately said to the Pharisees, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." We need to understand the irony of Jesus' answer to the Pharisees. The Pharisees considered themselves to be well heeled when it came to morals. They did not believe that they needed to have anyone teach them about right and wrong. The tax collectors and the sinners, on the other hand, well, they had no such preconceptions about their own morality. They knew who they were. And though they may not have realized they needed forgiveness, they were comfortable being around Jesus and listening to him teach them about the gospel of God. Throughout his ministry, this is the type of people that Jesus was around because they were open to listening to him. The Pharisees, on the other hand, considered these same people to be unclean, to be the untouchables, to be the non-people. And they were increasingly forming their opinion about Jesus based upon the company he was keeping. We too often judge people, evaluate people based upon our own values. Do they look like us? Do they dress like us? Do they comb their hair like us? Do they hang out with the same groups that we hang out with? Do they go to the same church that we go to? Do they vote for our candidates? Instead, we need to be asking, do they look like us? That is, are they human beings? Do they have plans and expectations for their lives? Do they have doubts and fears? Do they have hurts and regrets in their lives just like we do? Are they sinners like us? And are they in need in Jesus just like us? If we evaluated people based upon these questions, then this might be a much nicer world to live in. Every time you and I sit down around a table for a meal and we're surrounded by our friends and relatives and people we know, we need to remember we're eating with sinners, all in need of Jesus. Thank you for watching today. Please give us a thumbs up and click that subscribe button down in the lower right hand corner. And do come back again next week for another 7 Minutes in the Word.